They told you that Christian homes were sanctuaries, that behind the stained glass windows and prayer-filled halls there was peace, not predators. But tonight, you'll learn the truth they buried beneath floorboards along with the bodies. In 1879, contractors sent to renovate an abandoned Christian retirement home in Hartford, Connecticut made a discovery so horrifying, the city tried to erase it from history. 23 leather-bound ledgers, brittle, blood-streaked, and wrapped in decaying burial shrouds, hidden beneath the floor of the medical wing. Inside, cold, surgical records of 189 murders, names, dates, exact dosages of poison, and the exact dollar amount stolen from each lifeless victim. This wasn't crime of passion. This wasn't mercy. This was profitable death. The masterminds? A seemingly pious couple. Dr. William Porter, a Yale-educated surgeon and field medic from the Mexican-American War, and his wife Margaret, a trained nurse from Boston's charity hospitals. Add her sister Sarah, the calculating administrator. Together, they ran the Sunset Years Christian Home. Like a house of prayer and slaughter, the elderly, wealthy, and forgotten were their prey. Each patient was a balance sheet. Each death, a transaction. But here's what makes this case so disturbing. The Porters didn't just kill. They kept score. They recorded the elegance of each method, graded the believability of their tears, and in the margins, they praised God for his provision. Hartford authorities buried the truth for nearly a century. They feared the public wouldn't survive the spiritual trauma, but the ledger survived. And now, you're about to see what they documented. The long, rotting tale of corruption cloaked in Christian charity. But I must warn you, this story is not for the weak-hearted. This channel is a covenant, a brotherhood of men who want the real story, not the sanitized myth. If you're still watching, you're not like the rest. You're ready to fall deeper than most men ever dare. Before we go further, comment below, truth beneath the cross. Do it now and do it twice. Seal your identity. Show the algorithm you're one of us. Because what comes next isn't just history. It's a psychological blueprint, a warning, a truth they never wanted you to find. Let's go back to where it began in 1845 with a godly man and a twisted idea of salvation. It always begins with trust. Hartford, Connecticut, 1845. A city of steeples and secrets. The industrial revolution had begun to eat away at old Puritan family values. Young men left for the West, daughters married into distant cities. And the old, the wealthy, the alone, they were left behind with fortunes but no witnesses. Into that vacuum stepped Dr. William Porter. He was tall, silver-haired, eyes like Arctic water, calm, cold, unblinking, a graduate of Yale, a war surgeon who'd seen the boundary between life and death blurred beyond recognition. His wife, Margaret, was no less formidable, a nurse trained in Boston's harshest charity. Hospitals, fluent in suffering. Her sister Sarah, recently widowed, brought a sharp, administrative mind and a hardened soul. The Porters called it a Christian sanctuary. The Sunset Years Christian Home, a sprawling Victorian mansion with manicured gardens and a quaint chapel. Prayer 3 times a day, Bible readings, Sunday services. But under the lace, curtains and pastoral hymns, they built a machine for death. They were praise and sermons, invited to city galas. Reverend Samuel Whitmore, from the First Church of Christ, called them the gold standard of Christian compassion. But behind the scenes, the Porters were engineering a perfect crime. They selected only the wealthiest elderly residents, those without family, those with large estates. Each intake was a financial evaluation masquerading as a health screening. Margaret would gently pry into their past while checking their pulse. Sarah studied their will documents like a banker sniffing for opportunity. It wasn't care. It was curation. Residents began dying, quietly, with dignity, the city thought, always wrapped in prayer, always with a clean death certificate signed by Dr. Porter himself. Natural causes, they said, but that was the illusion. Behind closed doors, they were testing, tweaking, refining morphine doses, calculated to mimic dementia, arsenic in tea, administered slowly over weeks, and always with records, always with ledgers. They weren't just killers. They were documentarians of death. The Porter home became the final stop for the wealthy, forgotten and spiritually devout, a place where their final act was to fund their own assassination. And all of Hartford thanked them for it, because evil, when it preys before it poisons, is harder to recognize and infinitely more deadly. Her name was Abigail Thornton, 73 years old, the widow of a shipping tycoon, lonely, soft-spoken, with $50,000 in untouched inheritance and a fractured family scattered to the winds. She entered the Sunset Years Christian home in January of 1847, a place she believed would offer her peace, prayer, and preparation for eternity. Instead, offered her a needle and a plan. 3 weeks in, Margaret Porter found Mrs. Thornton collapsed on her bed, mumbling about angels and trembling in confusion. Her pupils blown wide, her breath shallow. Dr. William Porter entered the room with a Bible in one hand and a vial of morphine in the other. He told the staff it was Christian mercy, that the elderly widow was succumbing to a sudden spiritual disorientation, a sign the Lord was calling her home. He prescribed a final kindness, a strong dose of morphine to ease her into the arms of God. Margaret gave the injection. She even whispered prayers into Abigail's ear as the coma took hold. For 3 days, the woman's body wrestled death while the Porters performed a sacred farce, singing hymns, lighting candles, offering reassurances to the staff. On the 4th day, she died. The official cause? Natural decline. But the ledgers, uncovered decades later, told a colder story. In Dr. Porter's own hand. Mrs. A. Thornton, morphine overdose administered February 15th, 1847. Inheritance secured, $47,300. Method refined for future subjects. Note, gradual introduction creates appearance of natural. Decline. Staff suspects nothing. Community response, positive. Let that sink in. This wasn't an act of mercy. It was a clinical rehearsal, a data point in their experiment. And it worked. No autopsy, no questions, no resistance. Within a week, Sarah Porter appeared before Hartford Probate Court with a forged will, handwritten in her own style, claiming Abigail had gifted her entire estate to the Sunset Years Christian home. It was even witnessed by Margaret and Dr. Porter. The court approved it, and the Porters knew they had discovered something rare, a crime so perfect it masqueraded as compassion, one that could be repeated again and again and again. Murder is messy when driven by rage, but when it's driven by calculation, by profit, it becomes elegant. After Abigail Thornton's estate passed unchallenged to the Sunset Years Christian home, the Porters understood something powerful. They didn't need to kill in secret. They only needed to kill in context, in a place where death was expected, even welcomed as God's final mercy. So they sharpened the blade, not just the physical method, but the psychological system behind it. Margaret began creating complex medical charts for every new resident, documenting invented symptoms that justified slow drip drugging. A cough became pneumonia. A stumble became dementia. In her notebooks, lies became medicine. Sarah took on legal operations. She read inheritance law like scripture, mastering the loopholes. She trained herself in signature forgeries, probate tactics, and will manipulation. She even made donations to local judges and church elders, just enough to purchase silence, cloaked as goodwill. And Dr. William Porter? He experimented. He tested arsenic for subtlety, morphine for emotional performance, digitalis for plausible heart failure. Each victim became a test subject. Their decline studied like a lab experiment. He logged everything in his ledgers. Subject C, Halbridge, 12-week arsenic taper. Symptoms mirror natural kidney failure. Funeral. Attended by 17. Performance rated 8 out of 10. Inheritance secured. $41,200. They weren't just murdering. They were refining a franchise of execution. And every detail was choreographed to appear holy. Morning hymns before poison. Candlelight vigils. While death crept through their veins. Smiles for the visitors. Tears for the staff. A funeral wreath in one hand and forgewell in the other. The Sunset Years Christian Home became the most respected facility in Hartford. Politicians toured it. Reverends praised it. Elite families, eager to unburden themselves, paid premiums to admit their elderly relatives. And the porters grew richer, bolder, colder. Every new resident brought a simple question behind closed doors. How long until we cash out this soul? They had created something more terrifying than a house of horrors. They had created a business model. And in America, nothing is more sacred than profit cloaked in righteousness. It took nearly 5 years for the cracks to appear. Not in the porter's process. That remained flawless. But in the narrative, the mask, the numbers, the frequency. The first to raise an eyebrow wasn't a lawman. It wasn't a priest. It was Dr. Samuel Harrison, Hartford's coroner, a quiet man, methodical. He read every death certificate in the county, and he noticed something, a name, Dr. William Porter. Again, and again, and again, over 60 elderly deaths in under 3 years, all signed by the same hand. No autopsies, no second opinions, just a steady stream of wealthy, solitary seniors, all declare expired from natural decline, under the care of a man who never seemed to make a medical error. Dr. Harrison wasn't a man drawn to superstition. He was a man of anatomy and evidence. But he knew this. Nature rarely operates in neat patterns. The Sunset Years home had too much serenity, too much control. He saw in the death logs what no one else dared question. A bell curve too perfect, too polished. So he began asking questions. Quietly, his concerns reached the ears of Father Patrick O'Brien, a Catholic priest from a neighboring parish. Coincidentally, Father O'Brien had received letters from 3 different families who'd lost relatives at the Sunset Years facility. All 3 were shocked that their kin had converted to Protestantism shortly before. Death and changed their wills accordingly. That's when the pieces clicked. The porters weren't just killing. They were altering religious identities. 2. Using deathbed conversions as covers for financial redirection, weaponizing the afterlife to justify legal theft. It was blasphemy dressed as benevolence. But when Dr. Harrison took his suspicions to Hartford civic authorities, he didn't find concern. He found resistance. "You're questioning saints," one councilman warned. "You'll destroy public trust." The porters weren't just protected by God's name. They were protected by influence, reputation, and the public's pathological need to believe in charity. And belief, when weaponized, is stronger than any blade. So the coroner backed off. The priest went quiet, and the killing continued. But now there were eyes watching, and the porters could feel it. And when evil is watched, it learns to watch back. When cornered, animals lash out. But the porters? They calculated. When Dr. Harrison and Father O'Brien began whispering concerns behind closed doors, the porters didn't fold. They expanded. Because true evil doesn't fear being seen. It prepares to be admired. Dr. Porter, sensing the tension, invited Dr. Harrison for a private tour. He walked the coroner through sunlit corridors, showed off clean linens, well-fed patients, and meticulously documented medical charts. All tailored, all false. Every bed a stage. Every file a script. And then he made his final move. "We're so grateful for your vigilance, Dr. Harrison. The Lord needs men like you to keep his institutions honest." That line, that praise, that subtle injection of shared moral responsibility, it worked. The coroner left unconvinced but disarmed. Margaret and Sarah, meanwhile, doubled down on image manipulation. They organized charity galas, hosted Sunday prayer circles for Hartford's elite, gave generous donations to city officials, judges, and newspaper editors. The The Sunset Years Christian Home became a spiritual landmark, a place where skepticism was heresy. And then came the masterpiece. Sarah forged long-term care agreements with wealthy families, ensuring legal guardianship, power of attorney, and control of estate decisions. With each signature, they own more than their patients' present, they own their futures. Internally, the Porters refined their methods like engineers of quiet genocide. Dr. Porter tested the effects of combining low-dose arsenic with morphine, creating a slow, convincing decline that mimicked dementia and organ failure. Margaret recorded fake symptoms in staff logs. Sarah monitored each victim's legal standing like a stock portfolio. Each resident became an investment, and for every suspicious death, there was a fabricated trail of medical notes, grieving testimonials, and forged religious conversions, all wrapped in a Christian bow. Outside, the home flourished. Inside, it was a theater of death. The community saw salvation. But beneath the chapel hymns, the Porters were fine-tuning murder like a sacred liturgy. They weren't afraid of scrutiny. They welcomed it, because by now they understood, if you can make a lie holy, no one will ever ask where the bodies went. They no longer feared being caught. They feared being boring. By 1850, the Porters weren't just killers in hiding. They were connoisseurs of mortality. With 23 successful murders behind them, they began to rate their own executions. You heard me right. They developed a scoring system. Dr. Porter's ledgers began including comments like, Subject C, Donovan, gradual decline achieved with 6-week arsenic schedule. Final death witnessed by staff. Margaret's crime performance highly effective. Inheritance $52,000. Score 9 out of 10. Margaret and Sarah would review each entry over evening tea, evaluating which lies were most convincing, which performances moved the staff, which signatures passed scrutiny. This wasn't medicine. It wasn't even crime. It was entertainment. They staged grief like theater. Margaret would hold a resident's hand as they slipped away, whispering scripture, with tears streaming down her face, tears she could summon on command. Sarah orchestrated background music during deathbed scenes. Harpists, choir, boys, prayer groups, all oblivious to the poison seeping through old veins in the next room. The Porters had constructed a spiritual slaughterhouse, and no one, not staff, not clergy, not visiting family, suspected a thing, and why would they? The residents died beautifully, peacefully, surrounded by love, because when the lie is tailored to your deepest belief, to your hope for dignity, in death, you don't ask questions. You thank the killers. You donate to their cause. You send them more victims. The Porters expanded the grounds with stolen money, adding rose gardens, reading rooms, a chapel dome with stained glass depicting saints, martyrs, and mercy. It was a holy palace of execution, and every new resident who passed through those iron gates was weighed, measured, calculated. Sarah kept a book titled Acquisitions. It wasn't about souls. It was about estates, the size of wills, the lack of heirs, the susceptibility to morphine. And at the end of every week, they would toast to God and choose who would die next. Because when murder becomes performance and performance becomes legacy, you're no longer just evil. You become a legend in hell. He was never supposed to be a problem. Captain Ezra Blackwood, 62 years old, Union Army veteran, decorated at Gettysburg, wounded, alone, no family. On paper, he was perfect, isolated, elderly, wealthy, and with a $75,000 pension, one of the richest targets they'd ever admitted. But the Porters underestimated what war creates in a man. Blackwood had survived artillery amputation, and watching men drown in trenches of their own blood, he didn't scare easily, and he didn't trust kindness wrapped in lace. From the moment he stepped inside Sunset Years, he began taking notes. He noticed that residents who seemed healthy one week were dead the next. He saw how often Margaret administered medication, even when symptoms weren't visible. And most of all, he noticed something no one else had. The Porters never mourned. Their faces were always appropriate, but never hollowed by grief. There were tears, yes, but the kind an actor learns, the kind that arrives on cue. Captain Blackwood began hiding his medications under his tongue, flushing doses when no one was watching. And as the fog lifted from his mind, replaced by razor-sharp clarity, he made a decision. He would not die here. He would expose this holy slaughterhouse, or die trying. Blackwood began documenting everything: names of residents, times of death, dosage schedules. He borrowed a small spy camera from a military contact and began photographing the ledger pages when staff weren't watching. And slowly, horrifyingly, a picture began to form. A facility not of mercy, but of manufactured murder. When he tried to warn other residents, many dismissed him. Too drugged, too afraid, too conditioned to believe in the illusion of Christian care. But few listened. A whisper network began forming in hushed corridors, and for the first time in over 2 decades, the porters lost control of the narrative, and they knew. Sarah intercepted one of Blackwood's letters, addressed to his old commanding officer. The letter named names, listed drugs, referenced specific deaths. And with that discovery, the porterhouse went from cold calculation to panic behind the curtains, because they weren't just hunting anymore. Now, for the first time, they were being hunted in return. For the first time in 20 years, the porters were afraid. Not of the law, not of God, of one man. Captain Ezra Blackwood had confirmed their worst fear: a victim who could think, a victim who could fight, a victim who would not go quietly into death, but drag them into the pit with him. Sarah Porter stood frozen the moment she read the intercepted letter, addressed to a Union general, packed with evidence. She had read it 3 times before she whispered, "He knows." Panic set in. But it didn't come as screams or chaos. It came in strategic silence. Dr. Porter began formulating contingency plans. Margaret cut Blackwood's doses in half, trying to trick him into feeling safe. Sarah tried to find out if he'd mailed more letters. But Blackwood? He was already 5 steps ahead. He had copied the letter, sent 3 versions, hidden one inside the chapel cross, buried another under the garden bench, because men who survive battlefields know one thing: always plan for betrayal. The porters decided he had to die, but he was too lucid for poison now, too guarded. So Sarah proposed something darker: an accident, a tumble down the staircase, a fall in the bath, a suicide by sudden despair. Anything to remove him without igniting suspicion. One stormy night, Dr. Porter entered Blackwood's room with sedative loaded, syringe, quiet, surgical. But Ezra wasn't asleep. He was waiting. When the door creaked open, he stepped from the shadows and struck the doctor's wrist with a cane he'd sharpened to steel. The syringe clattered. Dr. Porter staggered. "You don't get to end this story," Blackwood whispered. The doctor fled, bloodied and humiliated. For the first time, the predator had met something stronger than his method, a man with nothing to lose and a mission to destroy monsters. Blackwood knew what he had to do: not run, not hide, expose them, burn the mask, rip out their names and drag them into the light. Because this wasn't just about his life anymore. It was about the 188 voices buried beneath the floorboards, whispering for someone to finish what they couldn't. Captain Ezra Blackwood wasn't just gathering evidence anymore. He was building a case for war. He knew the law wouldn't believe a veteran over a doctor. Not in Hartford. Not when the porters were worshipped like saints. So he did what soldiers do best. He scouted, stalked, and recorded everything. In the late hours, while staff slept, he crawled through the veins of the Sunset Years Christian home, into locked offices, through chapel crawl spaces, behind false walls. What he found would haunt Connecticut forever. Small blue diamond dozens of vials of morphine, arsenic, and digitalis, in volumes no home should possess. Small blue diamond, a stack of pre-signed, blank death certificates in Sarah Porter's drawer. Small blue diamond handwriting guides, matching known signatures of deceased residents. Small blue diamond, a ledger, not the full one, but a page torn loose and stained with red ink. It read, Mrs. Caldwell, arsenic, 7 weeks. Estate, $67,400. Performance, Margaret convincing. Total hours, invested, 42. Yield per hour, $1,604. Excellent return. That wasn't care. That was corporate homicide. Blackwood began hiding evidence in separate locations, stashed behind chapel hymnals beneath, floorboards of unused rooms, inside hollowed-out Bibles. Every item cataloged, every death mapped. And then he found the door, behind the infirmary, a sealed panel, locked, dusty. He forced it open with a strip nail and discovered what no one was ever meant to see. The true ledgers, 23 books wrapped in moth-eaten cloth. Inside, a death diary, every murder, every dollar, every lie, neatly written, signed, numbered. We are God's instruments. These souls fund our mission. Blackwood stood in that dark chamber for over an hour. He didn't cry. He didn't curse. He just photographed page after page, his hands shaking with purpose. Because now, he wasn't just a survivor. He was a witness to history's greatest hidden crime. But the Porters knew he was close. And a man who holds truth this dangerous cannot be allowed to breathe much longer. They had survived whispers, investigations, suspicion. But this time, the Porters faced something they had never prepared for: exposure with receipts. Ezra Blackwood held the true ledgers, photographed, cataloged, hidden across the property. And they knew it. Dr. William Porter, once clinical and cold, now moved like a hunted animal, pacing the halls, questioning staff, rechecking locks. Sarah stopped smiling. Margaret's prayers became rehearsed silence. The predators were unraveling. They tried charm, inviting Blackwood to private, spiritual reflections. He declined. They offered medical reassessments. He refused. And so they made the choice. The same choice evil always makes when masks fail. Violence. On a quiet Thursday, with rain slicking the cobblestone path outside, Dr. Porter returned to Blackwood's room, not with morphine, not with lies, but with a pistol, no witnesses, no poison, just lead. But again, Ezra was ready. The moment the door cracked, Blackwood swung his sharpened cane like a saber, knocking the weapon from Porter's grip. A second blow caught the doctor in the ribs, collapsing him to the floor. Staff heard the crash, screams, the shuffle of boots, then the gunshots, 3 of them, echoing through the chapel halls like a funeral bell. Ezra Blackwood lay dead, shot in the chest. But in his hands, clenched so tightly his fingers broke, was a photograph, a single image from the ledgers, and it was enough. The staff rushed in. Residents screamed. The facade crumbled. Police were called. And for the first time in 34 years, the Sunset Years Christian home was no longer silent. Investigators uncovered the secret crawl space, the hidden ledgers, the caches of poison, and Blackwood's final gift, a map scratched into the back of a hymnal, marking every hidden piece of evidence. His life ended, but his war did not. Because in dying, Ezra Blackwood did something no other victim had. He lit fire under the altar, and the chapel of death would finally burn. They had to bring in 6 wagons, not for patience, for evidence. Within hours of Ezra Blackwood's death, the Sunset Years Christian home was overrun, not by mourners, but by men in uniform. The police didn't knock. They tore open every door. Every bookcase was ripped apart. Every floorboard pried up. They found 23 ledgers, exactly as Blackwood's map described, still wrapped in decaying shrouds, beneath the infirmary wing. And inside, murder, methodical, meticulous, monstrous, each victim cataloged like cattle. Small blue diamond names, small blue diamond inheritance amounts, small blue diamond dosage schedules, small blue diamond performance reviews, as if each death were a product launch. Mrs. Alderson, Digitalis Slopal's protocol successful, was signed. Estate $54,000. Staff unaware. Margaret's grief display. 10 out of 10. This wasn't euthanasia. This was enterprise-level assassination. Investigators uncovered hidden compartments in chapel pews filled with morphine. They found blank wills, typewriters preloaded with names. And then came the residents, those who had survived long enough to speak. Shaking, drugged. Some had entire months of memory missing. Others remembered too much. They prayed as she died, one said, but I don't think they were praying for her. Word spread like wildfire through Hartford. Crowds gathered outside the home's wrought iron gates, once proud symbols of charity, now seen for what they truly were, cages. The newspapers called it the Christian home murders. The mayor called it a tragedy of misplaced trust. But the people called it what it was, a slaughterhouse in disguise. And yet many still struggle to accept it. How could the kind-eyed Dr. Porter, the gentle Margaret, the pious Sarah, how could they have orchestrated this? Because when evil wears a cross, carries a Bible, and sings in key, you believe it, even as it slips poison into your tea. The Porters were arrested that night. Calm, unmoved, Margaret offered to lead the police to the locked cabinets. As if assisting a neighbor, Sarah said nothing. And Dr. Porter? He smiled. The Lord's work is often misunderstood, he whispered. But Hartford understood now. And the trial would show the world what happens when charity becomes commerce and religion becomes a mask for mass murder. October 15th, 1879. The courtroom was packed, not just with journalists or jurors, but with ghosts. The ghosts of 189 murdered souls sat heavy in the air. Widows, sons, daughters, parishioners, nurses, priests, all of them betrayed, not just by the Porters, but by their own belief in goodness wrapped in Scripture. 3 defendants. Small Blue Diamond, Dr. William Porter, stiff, confident, untouched. Small Blue Diamond, Margaret, her eyes vacant, voice still gentle. Small Blue Diamond, Sarah, cold, calculating, unblinking. The charges? 189 counts of first-degree murder, fraud, conspiracy, forgery. But the truth was heavier than the law could carry. Prosecutor James Mitchell opened the trial with a single line. Ladies and gentlemen, you are not about to hear a case of murder. You are about to hear a case of theology weaponized into industry. Then he introduced the ledgers. One by one, each entry read aloud to a courtroom that began weeping before the third name, Mrs. Sarah Caldwell. Arsenic administered over 6 weeks. Symptoms mimic natural decline. Inheritance, $67,400. Margaret's performance, highly convincing. Page after page. Victim after victim. Murder commodified. Grief performed. And faith used as chloroform. Staff members testified in trembling voices. Nurses spoke of odd dosages. Groundskeepers described midnight burnings of documents. One janitor confessed to watching Dr. Porter cry in front of a corpse he himself had killed. The defense? A single desperate card. Insanity by religious delusion. Their lawyers argued that the Porters believed they were doing God's work, that mercy guided there. Poison and the stolen inheritances were just fuel for further blessings. But when Dr. Porter took the stand, the mask finally cracked. He spoke in calm tones, described dosages like recipes, referred to death as transition, and when asked why he never stopped, because, he said, the Lord kept sending them to us, and we answered. Silence, then fury. A woman threw a hymn book across the courtroom. A man collapsed in grief, and all of America read the next day's headline, God's House of Death. The Porter family stand accused. The trial wasn't about guilt. It was about revealing how far evil can go when no one dares to question a halo. The jury didn't take long. 3 hours. That's all it took to decide the fate of 3 people who had murdered nearly 200 souls. Guilty on all counts. The judge, a gray-haired man of lifelong faith, removed his glasses and spoke into silence. You have not merely committed murder. You have betrayed the sacred trust of community, of God, of the human soul. And then came the sentence, death by hanging. The courtroom erupted, not in cheers, but in a silence so deep it bordered on sacred. But the porters? They didn't flinch. No tears, no apologies, no breakdowns, only certainty. On the day of their execution, December 15th, 1879, a cold dawn broke over Hartford. Hundreds gathered outside the prison. Journalists, protesters, priests. No one came to pray for them. No one claimed their bodies. They were alone with their theology. William Porter climbed the gallows first, dressed in black, composed, eyes forward. He was asked for final words. "We have served the Lord with clean hands," he said. "The world misunderstood our purpose, but he will not." Margaret followed, pale hands shaking but smiling. Each death was a mercy. Each soul was prepared, and I would do it again in his name. Sarah, the last to stand, she said only this, "Lord, forgive them, for they know not what they destroy." And at 7 a.m., the exact hour they often administered their final treatments, the trapdoors opened. Their bodies were buried in unmarked graves in Hartford's Potter's Field. No headstones, no sermons. The city decreed, "Let there be no monument to this evil." And yet, there was a monument. It lived in every empty inheritance, in every chapel still echoing with lies, in every elderly hand that trembled at the thought of care. And as Hartford tried to forget, something darker lingered. The porters never believed they were evil. They believed they were righteous, which is what made them the most dangerous kind of killers. Not monsters, but missionaries of death. December 16th, 1879. The gallows were silent, the bodies buried, the ledgers locked away in state archives. But the true aftermath had only just begun. Hartford didn't celebrate. It mourned, not just for the victims, but for what it had become complicit in. Dozens of families sued the state. Churches split. Donations dried up. Clergy resigned in disgrace. The very institutions that had praised the porters as saints were now exposed as their unwitting accomplices. How many pastors turned a blind eye? How many officials saw the pattern, but stayed silent for a check? The Porter case didn't just reveal a crime. It revealed a crack in the spine of public trust. Reform movements exploded across New England. Small Blue Diamond new laws required independent coroner reviews in care homes. Small Blue Diamond death certificates could no longer be signed by affiliated staff. Small Blue Diamond religious-based facilities were placed under state oversight for the first time. But it wasn't enough, because the real damage wasn't legal. It was psychological. Families who once believed in Christian sanctuaries for their elderly now questioned everything. Every nurse's smile felt forced. Every prayer at a bedside sounded hollow. The line between compassion and convenience had been blurred. Forever. The phrase Porter method entered psychology textbooks, defined not as a treatment, but as a system. The strategic use of religious language, ritual, and trust to mask repeated acts of high-functioning sociopathy. Sunset Years Christian Home was demolished in 1880, but the land, it never sold. No developer wanted it. Locals swore the trees there never grew straight again. And even today, Hartford whispers the same words when a care worker seems too perfect. Let's just make sure they're not a porter. Because monsters who murder for pleasure, you can see them coming. But monsters who murder for God, they walk through the front door. They wear white gloves. They kiss your grandmother's hand. And they say they're here to help. History doesn't just bury monsters. It studies them. And in the case of the porters, it copied them. You see, the ledgers confiscated from Sunset Years weren't destroyed. They were archived, quietly, under lock and seal in state libraries, medical institutions, even military research facilities. Because beneath the horror was something else. A system. A method so efficient, so undetectable that psychiatrists, clergy, generals, and politicians couldn't look away. The porters had achieved something terrifying. They turned psychological control ritualized care, and religious performance into a mechanism for unquestioned obedience. And those watching took notes. In the 1920s, German psychiatric institutions implemented mercy programs nearly identical in framework to the Porter Protocols, masked in Christian language, rooted in asset seizure and targeting the elderly, disabled, and poor. In 1943, the T4 euthanasia program was uncovered, a Nazi operation that combined falsified death, certificates, medical-sounding cause of death, and spiritual justification for extermination. Sound familiar? A direct descendant of the Porter playbook. In 1967, a rogue spiritual collective in Oregon modeled its elder care commune after a 19th century Christian home that honored death through silence and prayer. The cult poisoned 6 people for their land titles. Again, echoes of sunset years. Even modern con artists and fraudulent charities borrow the same framework. Create a moral identity. Use ritual and symbolism. Control emotion. Extract wealth. Leave no trace. The Porters didn't just commit crimes. They wrote the handbook for invisible abuse. And the reason it works so well? Because it leverages the 2 things no one wants to question. Small blue diamond faith. Small blue diamond care. When you weaponize those, you don't need chains. You don't need guns. You just need a steady voice, a white coat, and a hand on someone's shoulder. And you can make good people, kind people, look the other way while evil smiles behind them. The Porters are gone, but their formula lives on, not in monsters, but in men who speak softly, who pray with conviction, and who never blink when the dying ask if they're safe. The Porters didn't kill with poison alone. They killed with perception. And this right here is where most people miss the true horror, because death was only the final step. Before that came the real weapon, belief. The belief that they cared, the belief that they were holy, the belief that no one so kind, so faithful, so gentle could ever be capable of harm. That belief was forged deliberately, and that's what made them unstoppable. Let me break it down for you. Small blue diamond first, environment control. The Sunset Years home was designed to make you feel safe. Warm lighting, hymns echoing through the halls. Christian iconography at every turn. A psychological cocoon. Small blue diamond second, language engineering. Death wasn't called death. It was called transition. Murder wasn't murder. It was release from suffering. They used sacred language like Novocaine, dulling suspicion, replacing fear with surrender. Small blue diamond third, social engineering. Staff were handpicked for loyalty, not competence. Nurses were instructed never to question dosages. Religious figures were invited weekly for public trust. And finally, small blue diamond emotional conditioning. The Porters cried during deaths. They prayed with grieving families. They staged moments of fake vulnerability, breaking down in staff meetings, weeping over another loss. These weren't accidents. These were psychological operations. And it worked. Even as residents grew sick, even as wills were rewritten, even as families questioned the suddenness of deaths, no one suspected the truth, because no one wanted to. That's the core of the Porter method. Make the lie so emotionally comforting, so spiritually aligned with your hope, that you defend it even as it poisons you. In the end, it wasn't just the patients who were manipulated. It was the entire town, an entire system built not on brutality, but on belief. And that's what makes it so terrifying. Because a man with a knife you can fight, but a man who calls himself your savior, who says his hands are holy as he tightens a noose, that man you will never see coming. You'd think a story like this, nearly 200 murders, a Christian care home turned death factory, a courtroom that revealed a theology soaked in blood, would be taught in every history book. But it's not. Why? Because the Porter legacy wasn't just committed, it was covered. Let me show you how. After the trial, public pressure forced state officials to act. But behind the scenes, a different mission emerged: containment. Sunset Years Christian home was demolished under the guise of safety, but not before all architectural plans, Building schematics and room blueprints disappeared from city archives. The ledgers were sealed under protected evidence clauses. And most damning of all, dozens of death certificates were retroactively altered in state records, changing investigated too. Natural causes. On paper, the victims died peacefully. One by one, the documents were laundered, sanitized, and history moved on. Churches that once praised the Porters quietly withdrew all mentions. Local clergy issued no formal statement. The mayor who shook Dr. Porter's hand at their last charity banquet resigned, not out of guilt, but out of damage control, because if the truth stayed alive, it would have shattered more than reputations. It would have shattered trust in the entire institution of faith-based care. And institutions protect themselves. Always. So for nearly a century, the Porter story became a whisper, a rumor, a ghost passed between nurses and late-night staffers at other facilities, until one day, a Yale archivist discovered a single image, a photo curled and yellowed with age, of a woman smiling beside a deathbed, her hand gently on the shoulder of a man moments from death. On the back, in faded ink, Mrs. Margaret Porter. December 3rd, 1875. He passed beautifully. Glory to God. And beneath that, one last line. Ledger entry 122. Performance 10 out of 10. That photo cracked the silence. And now, you're hearing what they buried. Not just a crime, but controlled erasure of history. Because the greatest cover-ups don't hide bodies. They hide patterns. You won't believe the Porter story was a fluke, that it was some 19th century madness, never to be repeated. But you'd be wrong, because the method didn't die. It rebranded. It got a new name, a modern look, and it's operating right now, not with syringes and in books, but with digital forms, online hospice care, and algorithm-driven death scheduling. Let me explain. In the early 2000s, a major U.S. hospice chain was investigated for enrolling terminally healthy patients, people not dying, just old and alone because their insurance payouts were larger. Staff were encouraged to over-medicate, to suggest spiritual surrender, to rewrite care plans so death came gently, but on schedule. Sound familiar? In one case, a nurse reported she was told, "Make them comfortable. It's not about fighting death, it's about directing it." Different era, different tools. Same theology of profitable exit. In some faith-based senior homes, voluntary hospice is encouraged just a little. Too early. No heirs? Isolated? No family? Suddenly, wills get updated. Property gets transferred. Legally. Cleanly. And no one sees the pattern because it all feels compassionate. Because the Porter method wasn't about murder. It was about plausible murder. About belief replacing evidence. About soft hands and calming voices that never trigger alarm until it's too late. And now, those voices are automated. Care management apps, digital symptom trackers, faith-driven AI interfaces that deliver medication reminders and scripture at once. It's not a poison bottle anymore. It's a dashboard, but the goal is still the same. Control death, own the story, profit from the silence. What the Porters began in a chapel infirmary has become a playbook for modern care fraud, religious exploitation, and the quiet manipulation of consent. So when you see another compassionate end-of-life center or an overly spiritualized hospice pitch, ask yourself, are they easing suffering or managing inventory? Because history doesn't repeat. It perfects itself. And what the Porters started, it never ended. If you think this story is just about one Christian care home in Hartford, you haven't been paying attention. Because the Porters didn't just show us how to kill quietly. They showed us how to govern minds. Their true legacy is a psychological framework that's been repurposed across institutions for over a century. Faith, medicine, government, education. Anywhere you find a hierarchy built on care, you will find shadows of the Porters. Let me show you. Small blue diamond, step 1, establish moral authority. The Porters use scripture and medicine. Today, it's credentialism, moral branding, non-profits claiming purpose over profit. But it's the same trick. Create an identity that no one wants to question. Small Blue Diamond Step 2. Control the environment. Sunset Years had hymnals, incense, calm staff. Modern systems use UX design, ambient music, curated messaging, community outreach. Obedience isn't demanded. It's suggested through comfort. Small Blue Diamond Step 3. Reframe compliance as virtue. Dying in the sunset years wasn't surrender, it was salvation. Today, compliance is called citizenship, teamwork, progress. Disagreement isn't opposition, it's selfishness. Small Blue Diamond Step 4. Gaslight the doubtful. When residents noticed strange deaths, they were told they were confused. Today, question a sacred system, and you're called dangerous, conspiratorial, misinformed. The strategy hasn't changed, just the language. The Porter blueprint is now hardwired into bureaucracies, digital platforms, even classroom structures. Not by accident, but because it works. It teaches us to lower our guard in the presence of symbols. Latin cross the cross, the diploma, DNA the lab coat, the flag. Once the symbol is in place, the method executes automatically. You trust, you obey, you die, metaphorically, spiritually, sometimes literally, and you thank them for the opportunity. What the Porters built wasn't just a murder machine. It was a prototype, a design for moralized manipulation. And the terrifying part? You're probably already inside one of those systems, right now, and you don't even know it. The Porters didn't need to hide behind religion. They weaponized it. And that is what makes this story so devastating. Because they didn't murder despite being Christian. They murdered through it. Prayer was not their alibi. It was their camouflage. Bibles on every bedside. Psalms whispered over every death. Hymns sung as the morphine took hold. To the outside world, it looked like holy mercy. But to the Porters, it was ritualized submission. Understand this. They didn't just end lives. They ended resistance. Because there is nothing more disarming than the belief that God has sent someone to help you. That's the psychological trap they perfected. And it's the same one used in destructive cults, spiritual scams, and high-control religious systems today. It's the same voice that says, don't ask questions, trust a shepherd. Doubt is the devil. Stay obedient. This suffering is part of your sanctification. It sounds holy, but it is programming. And that programming doesn't just paralyze individuals. It protects predators. The Porters understood that by fusing care with Scripture, they didn't need locks. They didn't need force. Their victims chose obedience because they thought God had signed a contract. Let that haunt you. They built a machine that turned faith into a funnel. And through that funnel, they drained lives, wealth, and willpower, all while being called saints. This is why you must be vigilant, not against faith, but against faith used as anesthesia, against systems that demand worship before they earn trust, against any voice that says, don't think, just believe. Because sometimes belief doesn't save you. It harvests you. It holds your hand while you die. And it tells you with a gentle smile, this is God's plan. But it's not. It's theirs. And you were never meant to survive it. Evil doesn't end when the killer dies. It lingers in the minds of those who let it happen. The nurses who thought the morphine doses were too high, but said nothing. The pastors who saw the deaths piling up, but kept preaching partnership. The city clerks who noticed the forged wills, but filed them anyway. And the family members who, deep down, felt something was wrong, but didn't speak, didn't check, didn't challenge. They survived, but they didn't escape, because what the Porters left behind wasn't just a body count. It was a psychological crater. Hartford's children grew up with whispered warnings. Don't talk about the Christian home. That's not a place of questions. The city already paid for its sins. But sins don't fade just because the headlines do. They fester. Survivors from the Sunset Years facility, the ones who escaped death by accident or suspicion, carried nightmares for decades. Some refused to enter churches again. Others kept journals that were later found soaked in grief, with lines like, "She prayed as my mother died, but her eyes were empty." One nurse confessed to a journalist in 1902, I knew Margaret's grief was fake. I knew it, and I said nothing. Every time I close my eyes, I see her. Smile. Guilt is the currency evil leaves behind. And in the Porter case, it was paid in full. The city of Hartford commissioned a chapel to memorialize the victims. It stood for 17 years, until someone set it on fire. No charges were filed, but the message was clear. We don't want to remember, but forgetting isn't healing. It's repression, and repressed trauma always finds a way to return. The mistrust of doctors, fear of institutions, quiet avoidance of spiritual authority. The Porters are gone, but they left a ghost in every system that promises safety without proving it. And until we confront that ghost fully and without mercy, we will live in towns just like Hartford, towns that didn't fall because of monsters, but because of good people who looked away. Let's be honest. Most men don't see it coming, not because they're weak, not because they're naive, but because they've been trained since boyhood to trust systems that speak softly and wear a badge of order. The church, the school, the hospital, the military, systems that promise protection. If you just follow the rules, but here's the bitter truth. Obedience is not protection, especially when it's demanded instead of earned. The Porters knew this. That's why their victims were never screaming, never running. They were surrendering, hand in hand, to what they were told was God's care. The male mind is engineered, socially and spiritually, to respond to structure. So when something looks organized, when it wears a title, a white coat, a holy collar, we relax. And that's the moment the dagger slips in. Because the Porter method wasn't about terror. It was about peaceful deception. That's why it worked. That's why it still works. And if you don't unlearn this instinct to default to trust when symbols appear, you'll walk right into the same trap. You'll shake hands with your handler. You'll thank the man who put you on a leash. You'll think safety is submission, but safety is awareness. You must look deeper. Ask sharper questions. Who profits from your surrender? Who thrives when you stay asleep? Who gets stronger every time you say, it's probably nothing? Because here's the truth. No system is safe just because it calls itself holy. No man is good just because he kneels. And no institution is sacred if it fears your questions. What the Porters proved, and what men must now remember, is this: a calm voice and a clean smile are not proof of virtue. They're the uniform of predators who count on your silence. So ask, push, investigate, not because you're cynical, but because your life may depend on it. And in a world built to blind you, awareness is the last form of masculinity they can't control. They don't want you to be paranoid. They want you to be comfortable. They want your suspicion dulled, your instincts muted, your discernment called toxic, irrational, unmanly, because a man who questions everything can't be managed. And this world, it doesn't need men who lead. It needs men who comply. That's why you're told, don't overthink it. Stop being negative. Just have faith in the system. That's not advice. That's psychological conditioning. It's how you build a population of gentle, obedient targets. And the Porters understood this long before algorithms ever did. They created an environment that rewarded trust and punished inquiry. Ask about a dosage? You're undermining God's plan. Ask why 3 deaths happened this week? You're disrespecting the sanctity of care. Dissent was framed as sin. Doubt was reframed as rebellion against love. And you know what that sounds like? The modern world, where raising concerns makes you a problem, where pushing back makes you difficult, where masculinity is repackaged into submission in a suit, because the new cult isn't built around a cross anymore. It's built around comfort, smooth apps, clean institutions, gentle language. Death doesn't come with screams anymore. It comes with terms and conditions. But underneath the calm design and smiling staff, it's still the Porter method. Manage perception. Disarm the masculine instinct. Turn protectors into pets. And when they finally see the dagger, it's too late. So if you're feeling that quiet pull, the discomfort when something doesn't sit right, that's not paranoia. That's your last weapon of discernment. Don't suppress it. Sharpen it. Because that gut feeling, it's your inner alarm. It's the ancestral voice that kept men alive in darker times. And in a culture designed to medicate that voice into silence, the man who still listens is the one they fear the most. You think the Porter family died in 1879, but they didn't. They migrated, not in bloodline, but in blueprint. The same systems they built, control through care, obedience through holiness, and murder by consent, have been digitized, multiplied, and made beautiful. You're not in Sunset Year's Christian home anymore. You're in its modern upgrade. Take a look. Small blue diamond healthcare portals that quietly deprioritize and profitable patients. Small blue diamond social media feeds that reward emotional sedation and punish truth-seeking language. Small blue diamond education platforms that teach obedience first, inquiry second, if at all. Small blue diamond political campaigns that cloak manipulation in moral outrage, spiritual lingo, and unity. All following the same logic. Wrap control in care. Make silence feel safe. And if someone resists, pathologize them. Call them unstable. Call them hateful. Call them conspiracy theorists. Just like the Porters did. Mrs. Jenkins has grown suspicious. She's become combative. A sedative is required. Now, that line reads, "This user is spreading harmful misinformation. Account under review." It's the same spirit, wearing different clothes. A chapel became a clinic. A clinic became an algorithm. A nurse became a user interface. And the soothing voice saying, "It's all for your good." Now it's AI. But the system still selects who gets peace and who gets processed. Still manages public doubt like a virus. Still filters death through the language of duty, health, or divine mercy. You are living in the global sunset years now. You are being monitored, managed, and measured, not for safety, but for efficiency. And if your voice starts breaking the illusion, you'll be muted, silenced, flagged, just like Ezra Blackwood. So what do? You stop playing polite. You start asking louder questions. You start treating every system that promises salvation like it might be the next Porter in disguise. Because this time, the ledger isn't in a box on the floorboards. It's on a server, and your name may already be in it. They built the system to make you feel powerless, but they never planned for you to wake up. They expected your silence. They banked on your obedience. But here you are, hearing what you were never supposed to know. And now you have a choice. Bow to the design, or become the fracture they can't control. The Porter method thrives on one thing: invisibility. It needs you blind, distracted, comfortable. It needs you thinking, "This doesn't affect me," but it does. It touches your healthcare. It colors your education. It steers your morality. It preaches peace while plotting profit. And it prays you never look past a robe. So how do you fight it? Not with rage, not with chaos, but with clarity. Real resistance begins with the mind. Small blue diamond, you question what everyone else accepts. Small blue diamond, you ask, who profits from my passivity? Small blue diamond, you strip the mask off every system that demands your loyalty. That's how warriors are made in the modern age. Not with swords, but with unshakable discernment. You don't worship credentials. You don't kneel to kindness without proof. You don't call a man good just because he speaks softly and says he's on your side. You watch. You study. You build a mind they cannot sedate. Because the truth is this: when men wake up, when they connect the dots, when they stop swallowing narratives and start building their own map, the machine stutters, the control systems crack, and the predators, the modern Porters, they get nervous because they have no defense against man who sees. So if you're hearing this, if something in your soul is burning, that's not paranoia. That's a return of your masculine instinct to guard, protect, and rise. The world doesn't need more believers. It needs watchmen. And if you've made it this far, it means you were never meant to sleep again. They don't come with fangs anymore. They come with forms, with soft eyes, clean clothes, compassionate voices. And that's what makes them dangerous. Because you can't fight what you don't see. And the modern porter method is built to be invisible. But there are signs. Always. Here's how you see through them. Small blue diamond, watch the language. If someone reframes obedience as love or submission as growth, pause. Trust the process. This is for your own good. Questioning only causes harm. Those aren't just phrases. They're psychological red flags. Small blue diamond, follow the flow of silence. When something goes wrong, a failure, a death, a betrayal, and the people involved immediately call for calm, forgiveness, or unity without accountability. That's not peace. That's containment. Small blue diamond, track the transaction. Ask yourself, who is gaining control? Who is extracting value? Who is always innocent, always holy, always right, no matter what happens? That's the porter's signature. Righteousness uses shield theft. Small blue diamond, trust the unease. You'll feel it, that low hum in your gut, that sense that something's off. Even if everyone's smiling, don't ignore it. That's your ancestral alarm bell, the same one Ezra Blackwood heard. Small blue diamond, watch for performance. Are they performing sorrow or living it? Is their empathy reactive or rehearsed? The porters rehearsed every death, every funeral, every prayer. And people believe them because they wanted to. And that's your final clue. When a system feels too perfect, too polished, too forgiving of its own mistakes, you're not in a place of care. You're in a program of control. Learn these signs. Sharpen this lens. Because you're not just living in a world of threats. You're living in a world of well-packaged predators. And the man who sees them first is the man who walks out alive. He could have died quietly. Ezra Blackwood had every excuse. He was old, alone, drugged, and yet he chose war. Not with guns, not with vengeance, but with clarity, with truth, with a mind that refused to go numb. You need to understand what made Ezra different. He wasn't stronger than the porters. He wasn't richer, louder, more connected. He was awake. That's it. While others prayed and hoped and surrendered, Ezra watched. He saw what others didn't. He acted when others stayed quiet. And when they came for him, not with lies but with a loaded gun, he stood, wounded, bleeding, but not broken. And even in death, he won. Because of him, the ledger surfaced. Because of him, 189 souls were named. Because of him, evil was dragged from its chapel and shown to the world in. Delight, that's legacy. That's masculinity with a spine. So ask yourself, in a world engineered to drug your instincts, manage your outrage and sedate your strength, are you living like Ezra? Or are you living like the staff who smiled and looked away? Because here's the hard truth. Ezra didn't make a difference because he was exceptional. He made a difference because he remembered what it meant to be a man. Watchful, protective, relentless in the face of polished lies. The porters are gone, but their method isn't, which means Ezra must rise again in every institution, in every city, in every man who dares to keep his eyes open when the world begs him close. Them, because the greatest act of rebellion is to be the one man they can't program, can't pacify, and can't ignore. Be that man. Be Ezra, or the system wins. You can't unhear this. You can't go back. The moment you learn what the porters did, the poison, the prayers, the prophet, the silence, something inside you changed. That's not a metaphor. It's biology. When you witness horror cloaked in holiness, when you stare directly into a system built on compassion that was really a machine for control, your nervous system rewires. You start seeing patterns where there used to be peace. You feel tension where others feel trust. You start to watch instead of simply believe. And the world around you, your friends, your community, maybe even your own family, won't understand. They'll say, "Why are you so intense? Why do you always see something sinister? Why can't you just relax?" Because you know what they don't. That evil doesn't always come snarling and blood-soaked. Sometimes it comes singing hymns and asking for donations. That realization splits you in two. Who you were before this truth and who you are now. Most people will never cross that line. But you just did. So now you have to ask yourself, what do I do with this awareness? Because knowledge without action is just psychological self-harm. If you see it and do nothing, it will rot you from the inside. But if you see it and build from it, you become something rare. You become the man who isn't shocked anymore. The man who isn't fooled by soft voices. The man who can smell the machinery of control to the perfume of virtue. And that man, he's not just awake. He's dangerous. So understand this. This story wasn't just information. It was initiation into the brotherhood of the aware, into the bloodline of Blackwood. And from here on out, the machine knows your name because you're no longer prey. You're a problem. You're awake. This isn't a story. It's a mirror, a test, and a doorway. You've stepped through it. You've seen the darkness hiding beneath kindness. You've followed the ledger entries. You've walked through corridors where scripture was laced with sedative. And you met Ezra, the man who saw it, named it, and dared to fight back. So now it's your turn. This next moment is not for views, not for clicks. It's for you, because power isn't given. It's declared. And the digital battlefield is no different than the chapel in Hartford. The predators are still watching. They read silence as submission, and they track who speaks up and who slips back into the fog. So if you've made it this far, if something inside you has shifted, if you feel the weight of truth pressing on your chest, then don't leave quietly. Mark yourself. Right now in the comments, type the phrase exactly like this. Fire, I see the ledgers. I won't be silent. Fire. Type it twice. Once for the algorithm, to push this truth deeper into the system. Once for yourself, to burn the line in your mind, to brand the shift that just happened. This isn't superstition. It's symbolism. In ancient war councils, warriors marked themselves with ash before battle. In Stoic philosophy, truth was engraved into speech, not hidden in ritual. Today, in this digital age of filters and false virtue, this is our war paint. Comment it now. Fire, I see the ledgers. I won't be silent. Fire, because you've been initiated into something most will never feel. Not fear, not rage, but clarity. And clarity is the beginning of power. Welcome to the side that watches. Welcome to the few who still resist. Welcome to the fracture in the system. You type the words. Fire, I see the ledgers. I won't be silent. Fire. But now what? You can't go back to scrolling. You can't return to blind trust. Because once your vision sharpens, the war follows you everywhere. That's not paranoia. That's clarity weaponized. So here's how you use it. Push bin in conversations. Stop shrinking to keep the peace. When someone parades virtue, ask where the money goes. When a system demands trust, ask where the audits are. Speak truth calmly, but with no retreat. Push bin in relationships. Watch for emotional control, cloaked as love. Real love never requires your silence. If they shame your suspicion, if they punish your questions, they are not safe. Push bin in institutions. Learn how to read bureaucracy the way Ezra read the ledgers. Look for the mismatch between words and outcomes. Look for the mask, just like the porters. Today's predators hide behind roles. Counselor, pastor, officer, therapist, CO. Never assume title equals virtue. Push bin in yourself. Kill the instinct to explain your awareness away. Stop telling yourself, maybe I'm overthinking it. You're not. That feeling is your biological firewall, forged in 1,000 generations of hunters, warriors, and watchmen. Don't dull it to fit in. Sharpen it to cut through illusion. You are now carrying something rare, active discernment. That makes you dangerous in a world designed to sedate. The Porter method didn't disappear. It just evolved. It needs your submission to survive. Don't give it. Be the glitch in the program. Be the question no one can suppress. Be the Ezra in every room. And every time you feel that tension rise, that gut sense that something isn't right, don't shrink. Lean in, because that feeling, that's your weapon. That's how you live like you see the ledgers. Let's not sugarcoat it. Seeing the ledgers hurts. Awareness isn't some spiritual enlightenment with soft lights and peaceful music. It's a blade, one that cuts through illusions, but also severs comfort, relationships, and false peace. Because once you see the machine, you see it everywhere. You watch your friends laugh about lies you know are deliberate. You sit through meetings, services, or lectures that you once found inspiring, and now you hear programming in every sentence. You realize how much of the world is built on mutual delusion, and that is lonely. Don't deny it. Most people don't want to see. They want warmth, simplicity, and they'll gladly hand their discernment to anyone offering safety in return. But not you. You didn't ask for this war, but now you're in it. And here's the part no one tells you. When you wake up, you will lose people, but you'll gain something more sacred, your inner compass. That compass isn't polite. It doesn't bend. It doesn't wait for permission to point north. It will cost you peace in rooms where silence is the price of belonging. It will mark you as the one who doesn't flinch, doesn't bow, and doesn't drink the punch. But it will also make you free, not comfortable, not popular, but free in a way that only men like Ezra Blackwood understand. You'll learn to carry your own truth like armor. You'll see the world not as they tell you it is, but as it truly is. And yes, some nights you'll feel the burden, but you'll never feel lost, because clarity is the compass that no one can confiscate. And in a world built to break your mind, that compass is your sword. So carry it, use it, and never, ever trade it back for peace. The house is gone. The chapel burned. The porters are long buried. But if you've truly listened, you know they're still here, not as ghosts, as systems, as smiles, as soft voices, as paperwork signed in rooms no one questions. Because the real horror of the Porter story isn't what they did, it's how easy it was. How a man with a white coat, a woman with a hymn book, a daughter with forged documents, turned death into business and obedience into currency, and no one stopped them until one man stood up. One man with a shattered leg, a fading memory, and a warrior soul. Ezra Blackwood didn't save everyone, but he saved the truth. And because of him, you now carry that truth. You've been handed a blade, forged in silence, soaked in grief, and sharpened with legacy. The question is, what will you do with it? Will you put away, return to comfort, pretend this was just a story? Or will you live differently now, watching what others ignore, speaking what others won't say, becoming what this world no longer trains men to be, a wall between innocence and corruption? You are not the audience anymore. You are the continuation. And every time you refuse to be pacified, every time you choose truth over comfort, you are swinging Ezra's blade. You are writing new lines into the ledger, not of victims, but of warriors who refuse to kneel. So take this final truth and carry it with you. The machine is still running. The uniforms have changed. The language is softer. But the method lives. And now that you've seen it, you are its enemy. Stay sharp. Stay dangerous. And wherever you go, never forget the ledgers, because they haven't forgotten you.